Thank you for having me. I think I've definitely got the hardest job going after all of those amazing presentations, but feeling really heartened and inspired that so much is being done across the country with young people. So yeah, really enjoying the day. Thank you so much. Um, as Victoria said, I'm an architect, and so I guess my bringing to the table of this symposium today is really to bring the perspective of someone who's normally in a design team of consultants and isn't necessarily in the same position as somebody who's been brought on board with a focus to engage young people. And so really exploring how we as design consultants and design team members can do a bit more. So we're Askew Cavanna. This is the office where I work in every day, which is in the centre of the city. And this is our team. There's 6 of us, and we work on a whole range of projects. But the kind of thing that ties our clients together is that actually we work with a lot of really values-led clients, which is what we call them. So that means we work on a real range of projects, but we're fortunate to have people that understand that consultation and engagement and co-design is really intrinsic to the success of their project because of the value is core to the part of the business case of their organization. So as I said, the baseline understanding is that engagement is the only way to ensure success. But because of the scale of the projects that I work on, sometimes there isn't always the resources or budgets to specifically allocate to engagement. And I think that's maybe where it differs a bit from some of the earlier presentations, which are larger, more master planning or strategy schemes. Sometimes you can kind of allocate a budget, but often with a smaller project, the client, is questioning which consultants to appoint from the core design team, let alone further. So it's really this kind of pinch point between the scale of the project and the intention of those value-led clients really wanting to engage, but actually, because it's not mandated in policy, which I know we're talking about later, essentially puts it in the place of a choice and one that they can easily say no to sometimes. So as architects, we really try to encourage and facilitate that process to happen as best as possible. But unfortunately, a lot of the time it is a choice. So I'm going to be looking at youth engagement in the built environment across 3 kind of areas. So firstly, opportunities to include young voices in the process. So that's the design process, but also the decision-making process. I also want to look at a case study of ours, which was a winner in last year's Inspire Future Generations Award, and it's Docklands Youth and Community Centre. And then I also want to share some further thoughts that we've taken from particularly that project, but also some of our other projects where we work with young people. So in terms of opportunities to include young voices in the process, why? I feel like I'm going to be repeating what a lot of people have already said today, but I really can't stress enough how beneficial it is working with young people on projects in the built environment, and obviously, architecture projects from my point of view a lot of the time. Mainly because it's just a smart choice. I think if we're engaging young people in the built environment, it means that as they become the older generation, you've got a community that is engaged and empowered to lead the conversation, to make sure that they're questioning what their environment looks like, who it's used for, what does it represent. And I don't see how that can be anything but positive for absolutely everybody. So it's really imperative that we engage. And some of these points that other people have already mentioned, they're curious, they have no assumptions, which is really wonderful. They absolutely hold you to account. If you've said something in one session and you come back and you talk about something, they'll question why. Their perspective is unique. They have integrity, as we've talked about. They consider other people. They're intrinsically selfless. But they're also just loads of fun to work with. Design meetings and sessions with young people are so much more fun than the standard design meetings. And just some thoughts on how, more kind of strategically, I guess, the projects that I work on often are youth centres or sports spaces or educational spaces. And so there's a clear youth community that's already engaged in the project. They're kind of a direct stakeholder. But what happens if you don't have that on your project and you're working on something where there's no direct stakeholder that's a community of young people? And so what do you do to engage? And I think what Stephanie just talked about, I loved hearing, because for me, really, there's not really an excuse to not engage with young people, because you know where they are. They have to be in education. So they're in school or college, they're at Scouts, they're at Girl Guides, as Stephanie mentioned, they're in the mosque, they're at church. So really, there's no excuse not to find young people to engage as a stakeholder on a project. So I guess that says that's always possible. There's just no excuse. And then separate to that, once you've managed to connect and you've got this stakeholder of young people, just some thoughts really on how to work with them, which I know I'm preaching to the converted, but it's worth saying, just in case there's anyone who came to the symposium who doesn't really work with young people but wants to, is that young people will sniff out if you're not acting with integrity. If you're asking their opinion and it's surface or click box, they'll know and they will disengage, and the project will be poorer for it. And so you really need to act with integrity. I think talking their language, I remember when I first started doing engagement sessions, and it was engagement more than co-design. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to speak to young people. What are they going to say? Am I going to be talking about things they don't understand? And I was refreshingly surprised. They're really intelligent. They have really good understanding. Their knowledge is impressive. Don't patronize them, basically. I think, you can talk to them about what you're working on and what you intend to do. They'll pick it up and they'll come back to you at the same level. And that's really wonderful to experience. Get creative. Everyone has talked about model making, getting into 3D, using crafts and materials and imagery, but also words. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well. Again, amazing to see Stephanie, and that poem sounded beautiful. So I think words are a really powerful way to get young people thinking creatively. Make it fun. I think, activities, games, being spontaneous with how we work with young people is also good, not too rigid or too prescribed. And bring snacks, because if you have snacks, kids will come and talk to you about anything. That is my experience. So this is a quote that I think has already been used by a couple of people, but worth mentioning again, is absolutely true. If you design a space that works for young people, you design a space that works for everyone. So we should absolutely be doing it on all our projects. So now I want to look at a case study project, which is Docklands Youth and Community Centre. And this is definitely the opposite end of the scale from Ross's project and some of Stephanie's projects. So this is one building. It was an existing centre. And if I go down, it was working with a charity called Full Circle Project, who promote inclusion and enhance life opportunities for young people. It's in an area of Bristol that has a disproportionately high level of unemployment and crime rates. It's one of the most ethnically diverse areas in the city, and the charitable organisation was established following the St Paul's race riots, which were in the 1980s, following a lack of social cohesion and widespread frustration because of that. And so it was an existing building that was tired and not representative of who was in there, but it had a huge amount of social value, and it was right in the heart of the community. And so I guess the approaches were quite similar to looking at a master plan, but it was looking at a building. So we really wanted to understand who they were and what they wanted to do with the building. But there was also a clear defined brief from the client, which was for the project to better reflect the organisation today. They had to improve the services that they were offering to enable a reliable revenue stream as a business, but that allowed them to focus on providing their dedicated youth provision. And so really the challenge was how to reinvent the building to accommodate professional users and tenants in a way that aligns with their business case, where they really had to, but not alienate the young people, which are the absolute DNA of the building. And so our response to that, before any other further brief conversation, was we have to involve the young people from the inception, because otherwise it won't work. So it's worth also saying that this project, we began work in 2020. And so we were in the midst of lockdown restrictions, and we knew we wanted to absolutely collaborate with these young people that are vital for this building. But the first question was, how do we do that without being able to see them face to face? And also, how do we do that without being able to get the materials. As I've said, from a client point of view, this was definitely one that had the intention, but did not have the resources or the means or the budget to be spending and sending things to each of the young people that use the space. So we were really in a position where we had to figure out how we could meaningfully engage in this really strange time of not being able to be near anybody. We were also really aware that because of the news, because these young people were between 8 and 17 years old, they would be feeling really overwhelmed by what's on the news. They wouldn't have seen their friends for a long time. They wouldn't have visited the building for months. And so they were really dislocated in a lot of ways. And we really wanted this co-design process and design process to help alleviate some of those things that they would have been going through. So on a lot of our projects, we have a kind of stages of meaningful engagement that we bring to the project throughout. And we adapted and simplified our kind of pre-existing really active and participatory approaches to be used for digital workshops. And we also slowed the process right down and phased it and stretched it out so that kind of overwhelm would hopefully not happen. So the online engagement, I mean, I wish I had lovely, beautiful photographs of lots of children like on the other ones, but because of the situation of this being online, I don't have that. But the kind of innovative way we had to think about it really was, how do we get them to give us our feedback without being too over the top initially? And actually, we want a kind of hands-off approach at first, just to introduce the idea of the project to them. So we devised a simple questionnaire that was digital, and we got them to think about the existing building's design. And as I talked about, we couldn't send them materials. Some children had materials, but we kind of wanted to have it as quite a leveler where everyone could participate in the same way. And as and other presenters have talked about, is making sure that no one was kind of louder or doing more than others, and therefore had more of an input, and wanted to make sure it was quite balanced. So we got creative with very simple questionnaires and asked questions like, not just, do you like the space? What do you think of it? What do you want? But if you were going to walk through the building with somebody who couldn't see, how would you describe the rooms? And what that did was meant that the young people were able, with their parents and caregivers, to describe the spaces in a very visual way, and were already sort of thinking about what they wanted it to look like, or what they didn't like about it, and what it looked like, and what it felt like, what it smelt like, all those kind of emotional sensory things that you normally get from tactile working and being in spaces. We had to try and get that from words and questionnaires. And again, we're really amazed with the feedback and responses that we got. The questions that we asked were deliberately open to solicit feedback. And also we knew that with parents, when children weren't at school, this was really educational for them, and was an opportunity for them to kind of see it as schooling with their parents or caregivers at home. And so having those more open questions allowed them to think about it a bit more and create sessions at home. And parents' feedback were that it was absolutely saved a lot of the difficult times and overwhelm that the young people were feeling in that process. And as part of that, I guess because it already started being online and it kind of spread on the websites and the kind of hands-off questionnaire approach, social media obviously came into it. A lot of people were turning to that anyway at the time. But it kind of created this waterfall cascade of sharing stories, generational stories of the building and memories. There was just pages and pages, and we were taking this information as well and feeding it into the insights that we were getting from the questionnaires. And then we had workshops, so sort of roundtable discussions, we called them, where obviously you're not sat around a table, but we were on Zoom and it was live, and we were able to take some of this information and feedback and say, this person has fed back this, do you agree, do you not? And we did get a lot of insight and a lot of engagement, but obviously people can still be quite quiet or shy, and they're dealing with a screen, and it was a difficult time. And so what we did was created kind of interactive games, live polls, using imagery and colors and materials. And so they were anonymous, so we could share things, people could give their opinions very quickly, and then we were able to, in real time, discuss the feedback. Do you agree? Is that reflective of how you feel? And so it was very, very fast. Again, very opposite to the kind of longer term 25-year master plan, very much over weeks and months. But it meant that we very quickly got to a point where we were really on board with understanding what they wanted about the building, what they didn't like, what they needed, and then we were able to balance that with the brief of the business case from the client as well. So that led us to have a design concept largely from a lot of the kind of social media storm that happened naturally in the process, where the young people established that they had a really strong desire to share the story of the building and the organisation with those who visited, and that process would really give it some identity. So in a way, similar to kind of a master planning scale, we have a public realm when you want to show identity and culture. They wanted to do that within the building, and luckily it's kind of big enough to have the space to do that with existing rooms and corridors and externally as well. And so we identified that they had a really strong past, present and future, and they wanted to share all of that with people who came to the building. And we agreed that the best way to do that was through artist murals, and being intentional with where information was shared across the building as well, so that it became really focused and clear, enjoyable and inclusive to move through the building. And so at this point, this has been a few months in the project, and lockdown eased and we were able to bring the young people together in person for the first time since the design process has started. And so we just capitalized on that moment, and we had young people leading the process of writing the brief for the murals for the artists, having a selection evening where artists came in and talked about their work and showed some of their ideas, and young people were directly by that time quite confident at talking about design and what they thought, and they understood the lighting and how the spaces felt in the building, so they could respond about what they thought where the murals should go. And they became really involved and had authority over what became, the walls of their space, into being involved in the final pieces as well. And so because of that quick process, we were able to do concept sketches. Again, I think somebody talked about it earlier, maybe Matt and Fiona, about this kind of constant feedback loop that I think is really important of consultation. And what's amazing to see of Stephanie's presentations was that how much that could be done in person at evenings and weekends and lunchtimes. And when we were doing it online, we just didn't have the ability, it had to be on a screen all the time. But we still made sure that we did it so that when we got to this point and presented, this is what it looks like you're wanting the space to look like, young people responded and said, yeah, that's kind of what we imagined. And so these sketches very quickly became the final design proposals, and we were able to move forward and design and have the project realized. And so these are just a few photographs of the completed project with the children now in it. And I think, the feedback that we had from young people that had essentially not been into the building for more than a year was that they walked in and it felt familiar and they knew the spaces, and yes, that's what I wanted, that's what I designed. We talked about putting colour here, we talked about very focused areas. And so for us, that was really amazing and could be, seen as a successful co-design process, particularly from the young people's feedback and the organisation itself. But obviously this was one very unusual project of an existing building with a very clear stakeholder group and a very, very fast time frame. The whole project, as I said, was about a year. And so from design, the realisation was only a couple of months. And what the client could have done is just said, okay, it's COVID, the building's closed, no one's in, let's just get in and refurb the whole building. But the fact that they really wanted to engage young people throughout the process made the project better, and it ended up being completely different to what they would have imagined in the first place. So just a few further thoughts really from me in general about involving young people in the built environment as a member of a design team is that it's undoubtedly beneficial, but it's not without its challenges. But you have to champion it from an early stage and embed it in the process for it to really be meaningful. It's often within our remit to instigate the consultation, particularly on projects like this where they're not huge, they don't have really long-term processes, and there's no mundane policy that effectively forces people's hands to engage with people. It's up to us to ensure that it's been flagged up to clients and other consultant teams to get involved. And also, as I think it was Joe mentioned, to ensure that we're being authentic with the received information. I think with the project that I talked about, because a lot of it was real time and a lot of the information we gathered and then fed back to them and checked whether it was right. again, they were holding us to account and we couldn't have done anything else. We wouldn't have wanted to. But I can see that in processes, you know, if you get a report, you can decide to use which part of that report you want. And so really it's calling on authenticity with the received information. We assume that engagement will be required in all our projects. So Docklands Youth and Community Centre was a youth-led, you know, young people were stakeholders, but on projects where that's not the case, if we're working on office buildings for environmental organisations or we're working on housing projects, we will assume that we need to have engagement, even if it's not in the brief. And in our fee proposals, we'll make sure that we allow for that. And it's just a conversation with the client. And often, you know, if they say, why is that included? And you explain why it's imperative and why it will make the project better, they don't question it. Empowered young stakeholders are needed to hold the design team to account. Otherwise, it's a lost opportunity. Empowered is really the word there. If you've got young people that are being given lip service, but they actually don't have any way to hold you to account, then it's a real lost opportunity. And often, again, this might be particular to my discipline, but clients may have good intentions, but they don't want to raise expectations in a consultation and then disappoint. So there's often a bit of a fear around how to manage the expectations and that process. And sometimes that can realise in not wanting to do participation or to water down how much you engage with young people. And I think that's, again, part of the design team to manage. And if you've got fees and allowance of time and resource in the consultant teams to do that and you expect it to be done, it's not a conversation of, okay, well, yes, you can't really afford it, so we'll take it out. It's no, we're doing it, just how do we do it in the right way that keeps everybody engaged meaningfully, but that you are, you know, the fear of disappointing is alleviated. And I guess a couple of final ones. There's always ways to involve young people, whether it's through co-design and being very directly engaged, or even sharing the design process will be a really valuable learning opportunity. In particular from my point of view, as a woman of colour, I feel it quite important to go to share projects with schools or local groups if there's a project that's not directly engaging with young people, just so that they're aware of what a project is, what an architect does, what a design team does, what the project process is, and what you can look like to do those jobs. And so really it's about inclusivity, it's about representation, and all of those are just as vital learning opportunities as the design process. And so as a design team culture, as consultants, obviously with clients as well, but particularly in the design team, I think we need to foster an inclusive and participatory culture that means that all of the things that I've talked about are just part of the course. They're just considered at each of the REBA stages, and our projects and built environment will be the better for it. Thank you. Hopefully that wasn't too long.